Welcome back to Morning Joe, 8:27 here on the East Coast. Joining our conversation now, Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer. Tom, good morning. Appreciate you coming on with us, especially early out there on the West Coast. I understand you and your campaign have some news to share.
Yes, we do. One of the requirements to be on the debate stage is to have 130,000 individual donations, and people have been asking us if we're going to make it, and the answer is we've made it. As of this morning, in fact, we have 130,000 individual donations. So
you've met the donor threshold. You still have a poll threshold to make. Most people believe you will get there and that you will be on the stage for those debates. So what will be your message? This will be an introduction for a lot of the country, although you've spent a lot of money. You've been on the air a lot in places like Iowa, but most of the country hasn't met you, doesn't know what you stand for. In that crowded field, what will be your message in the debate?
I have a simple message, Joe, and that's this. We have a broken government. There's been a hostile corporate takeover of our government, and I'm here to return to government of, by, and for the people. I've been an outsider for 10 years, organizing coalitions of ordinary American citizens to take on unchecked corporate power, and for 10 years, we've been beating those corporations and winning. And that is my message, that is job one, to take back the government from the corporations who bought it.
And it's a similar message, as you know, Tom, to someone like Senator Elizabeth Warren or Senator Bernie Sanders, who've been railing against corporations and corporate money in politics. How will you be different from them?
Well, I think that the big difference is this, that I'm an outsider, that I have been doing it from the outside successfully for 10 years. If you look at the other people who are running for this nomination, they're overwhelmingly insiders. The top 4 people are all senators or former senators who have more than 70 years combined in the Congress and the Senate of the United States. So I think there's a big question for all Democratic voters. If job one is to take back the government from corporations, do you think it's going to come from someone who's a grassroots activist and who's been doing it from the outside successfully, or do you think an insider, somebody who's been working inside the Beltway for years, is the person who's actually going to change D.C.?
You can hear, as we sit here speaking, the criticism coming from Senator Warren or Senator Sanders that says it's a little rich for a billionaire, a guy who worked at Goldman Sachs and started an investment firm that made him a billionaire, talking about the interest of corporate power in America. How will you respond to that?
Well, I would say for 10 years, we've been taking on their right to buy the government. It's not that I don't believe in the private sector, Joe. I'm someone who believes that the American economy is powered by the private sector. But what I know is this. I don't want them writing the rules for how they behave at the expense of the American people. And we've taken on oil companies and drug companies and tobacco companies and beat them at the polls. And if you look to see who in the United States has done grassroots work, organizing people to go door to door, registering millions of Americans, changing the turnout for people under 30 by more than 100%, actually it's me. Everything that they're talking about doing is what I've actually been doing around the country for the last 10 years.
Mr. Steyer, as Willie was just suggesting, there are a couple of other people in this race already. There are, 21 Democrats running, 20 other Democrats running. Most of them are polling at 1 or 2%. Do you really think you have a chance of getting into that top tier of the top 4 or 5 that it would take you to get there, to get beyond the September debates?
I don't think there's any question about it. There was a poll that came out last night of the early primary states that has me tied for 4th. And, you know, I've only been in this. I got in very late, as you guys know. I've only been in it for 5 weeks. But I think there is a huge audience for the message that I'm giving, that Americans really are responding to this. Because everybody knows that these corporations have bought the government. And the question is going to be, if you go around and talk to people, which I've done for years, as part of these campaigns we've been running, they all say, yeah, the corporations have bought it. Who's going to stand up to them? And that's what I've been doing.
One of the things you've spent a lot of money on recently, I think you spent something like $250 million on politics since 2014. One of the things you spent a lot of money on advertising on recently is impeachment. You're in favor of launching impeachment proceedings against the president. As you know, this is something that is very divisive in the Democratic Party. It's something Nancy Pelosi really doesn't doesn't want, and she argues it could risk the Democrats' majority in the House of Representatives. Do you think it's helpful when they're having their debates for you to be launching ads on television about impeachment, which Democrats would argue at the leadership level is what's going to lose them the House of Representatives?
Well, let me just say this. It's not divisive within the Democratic Party about impeachment. I think something like 80% of Democratic voters agree with me. I started an impeachment petition almost 2 years ago because I said it is clear we have the most corrupt president in American history, that he is a threat to the American people's safety and health and the Constitution, and I tried to get other Americans to sign on with me, and over 8 million of them have done it. And I heard those exact same arguments in 2018, that, oh my goodness gracious, this is going to be divisive, it is not going to work. And we said, no, this is something that will help turn out Democrats. And in fact, what you can see is our list turned out at an 80% rate, and we did the biggest youth voter mobilization in American history. An organization I started, Next Gen American, turned out more young people than any organization in American history. So I actually don't buy any part of that argument that telling the truth and standing up to a corrupt and wrong-headed president is somehow bad politics.
Tom, Walter Isaacson has a question for you.
Hey, Tom, I want to talk a little bit about your business background. I was reading a great book about to come out from Nicholas Lemon called Transaction Man. And he talked about the role of corporations as they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and in some ways how corporations became a backbone of communities. They had quite a few stakeholders. But then he says what happened was that hedge fund managers, people like yourself, who were more interested in financial engineering, helped take the American corporation and destroy the way that they related to communities. I know this is a complex issue, but when you talk about taking on corporations, don't you feel that people who have been in the industry you're in, the hedge fund industry, have helped move corporations to be less good for society?
Actually, Walter, when you go back through history and look at what changed, I think the transformation you're describing did happen. And it happened in the courts of the United States. It used to be that people running corporation had different constituencies. They had the communities they're in, they had their employees, and they had their stockholders. And if you look in the early 1980s, there were a series of legal decisions in the courts of the United States that said, no, you can only think about your stockholders. And I believe that those decisions were actually substantial mistakes. And they took corporations from, as you said, at some level being stewards of important institutions in America to being people who really only were working on the bottom line. And I think the result, their attempt to control the government, to make sure that they have the biggest bottom line, it was really those legal decisions that basically put corporate CEOs in the position of only answering to shareholders, which I think was a dramatic mistake.
So, Tom, this is Mike Barnicle, and I've been listening to you not only this morning, but in the past. There are myriad issues out there that are of import to people. The security of this country, a paycheck-to-paycheck economy, how they live from week to week, things like that, race in this country, immigration in this country, and everything that's done to disturb the country, and the conduct and behavior, the moral behavior of the Trump administration. So, but in spite of all of that, are you telling us this morning that your principal goal is to go after corporate America?
What I'm telling you my principal goal is to take back the democracy so it will be of, by, and for the people. Because when you talk about the kinds of issues like healthcare, education, living wage, clean air, clean water, we have a situation where the government is serving the bottom line of corporations instead of trying to do what's right for Americans. So in order to deal with every one of those issues in a way that serves the vast bulk of working Americans and American families, we need to take out the corporate influence. And that's what I've been proposing to do. If you listen to what I've proposed as specific changes. One would be term limits in Congress. I've proposed a national referendum, ability to go directly to the American people in the way that we do in 26 states. If Congress won't do the job, go to the American people, which is what I've done for the last 10 years.
All right, Tom Steyer, the news again this morning. Tom Steyer has hit the 130,000 individual donor threshold to make the debate stage. And next month's debate, he now needs to hit one more polling threshold, and he will be there. Tom, thanks so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next on Morning Joe.
I was honored to be the first president to welcome Aung San Suu Kyi to the White House. I'm proud to be the first American president to visit this spectacular country, and I am very pleased that one of my first stops is to visit with an icon of democracy who's inspired so many people, not just in this country, but all around the world.
That's less than 7 years ago. Then President Obama praising Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. But things have changed dramatically since then. Our next guest describes her fall from grace. Former Obama advisor Ben Rhodes joins our conversation straight ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.